Kia ora koutou and welcome to this Ordinary Council meeting on the 22nd of March 2024. Just to note, this meeting is being live streamed and we have Mayor Nick joining us via Zoom. I will open us up with karakia. Ngā mihi o te rā ki te whānau e hui hui nei, kia tau te rangimarie e, kia whakatāpua tātou me ngā mea, e whakapono ana tātou, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. All right, councillors, I'll just say at the outset that I'll be looking to run a nice tight meeting today, seeing as we've only got it scheduled in for 30 minutes and we are well versed in the content of what's being discussed. But first up, we have apologies from Councillor Sampson. Is there someone willing to move that? Councillor Courtney, seconded Councillor Pakipaki. I will put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, that motion is carried. Confirmation of the order of business. There would be a slight change in the order of business and that we'll be dealing with the adoption of the long-term plan consultation document first because we have John Mackey, the Audit Director, joining us via Zoom. There is no, are there any interests to declare? No? Wonderful. Then we move to public forum, of which there is none. So I will welcome Louis, Susan and Nikki to the table to present on the adoption of the long-term plan 2024 to 2034 consultation document.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll just start by saying that we have distributed the audit opinion and it gives us a clean audit, which is great. It's been a lot of work by everyone around this table and a big staff team and also audit to get us to this point. There is one last addition that we will show you as a result of the audit. It's just an extra sentence to add, and also Councillor Rollo has a helpful addition to make as well. But if we have John Mackey online, then he might wish to speak to the meeting at this point.
Kia ora, John, if you're there. We've got him in the room, but currently camera off. Where's the joys of technology? Whilst we wait for John to join, is there anything else you want to cover off, Nikki?
Well, we could just go to the one amendment which was requested by audit, which is on rates affordability. They'll the governance advisors will be able to bring that up on screen. It's on page 16 of the draft consultation document. And you'll see it's rates affordability. We have three options. This is the third option that you're looking at there, which is if we were to reduce rates lower. So it's one choice for the community. The auditors just asked us to give some examples of the sorts of cuts, further cuts we could make to bring rates down a bit further because they felt the community would want to understand the nature of what those cuts might be like. So we've come up with this sentence which has gone to our hot review and they're comfortable that that meets their requirements. So this would be the one change required by audit to the document if council approves it.
Thank you very much. We're still... John, are you there? We've got him in the room, but we don't have him in the room.
Well, perhaps then I could also just show you the change that Councillor Rollo has suggested, which is about the accessibility strategy and audit. I think we can bring that up on the screen. So that is on page 44 of the design version, but page 41 of the Word copy, which you might be working from. We had accessibility strategy and audit in there, and he has suggested that we might just put some explanation, which is a helpful suggestion. So we've drafted those extra words just so the community is clear what we'll be doing.
Wonderful, thank you. Whilst we continue to try to get John, I'll just open for any questions for Nikki and the team. Seeing none, I think it would be worth just taking a brief adjournment to see if we can get John to present. So we will break for a couple of minutes. All right, we have managed to get John on this time, so we will reconvene and I will pass over to you, John, for any comments you would like to make.
All right, thank you. So as you would all be aware, it's a challenging situation being in local government at the moment with change in many directions, and the timing of the national elections didn't help. So it was difficult process to prepare your LTP and for us to audit it. We just do want to thank Nikki and her, the others that were supporting her in preparation of the LTP and through the audit, because it was a difficult process for them and for us, but it went reasonably smoothly, and we thank everybody for that. So in terms of what you've received is the draft audit report that we will issue, and you'll see that by actually choosing to have an audit of your consultation document, you as councillors have got a reasonable level of assurance. So it's not a guarantee that your LTP that the world will map out as you're planning it to do, but what we're saying is that you've prepared it on a sound basis. It's based on reasonable assumptions that have been flowed through based on sound asset management planning. So that's the basis of the opinion. That draft audit report also outlines what Audit New Zealand's responsibilities are, but it also sets out your responsibilities for the information that we've relied on. So there's a letter of representation that has to be signed, which in Nelson's situation is just a standard template letter of representation. So that's been done. In terms of getting to where we've got to, I sign the audit report on behalf of the Auditor General. So there was they have a process to ensure that the people that are auditing on his behalf act consistently and in accordance with his standards. So we took 3 items to an opinion review committee convened by the Office of the Auditor General. Those were the uncertainty about Waka Kotahi funding. So although that impacts, it's got significant potential impacts on Nelson City Council, you're not actually directly consulting on transportation matters. So you've highlighted in your supporting documentation that there is the uncertainty there, so that was considered sufficient. We looked at what was happening with climate change. One of the potential issues there that's significant to that could be significant to the long-term plan is climate retreat. But there was an additional from the draft consultation document that was prepared. There's been additional disclosure made about the council's approach to climate change in general, and that clarifies the position. So they were comfortable with that. And yeah, so the third item was in terms of affordability of rates. The consultation item that you originally had, they had concerns about whether it met the requirements in the Local Government Act that you actually have to specify the choices and the impacts of those choices. So the way it was, your 3 options were originally worded. 2 of the options weren't precise enough to actually present a choice and the impacts of those choices to your community. So they were reworded, and the opinion review committee was satisfied after those options were reworded. So that's where we've got to, and I'm pleased that you're in this position today to be able to adopt your CD.
Thank you, John. Are there any questions for John? Seeing none, I will just say a big thank you for your work to date and for the important work you will continue to do for us. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
If there is nothing else from our council team, then I will look for someone. Mayor Nick, you are on mute.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor, and can I acknowledge John and the work of the Auditor General on the document. Apologise for me being remote with COVID and not wanting actually to miss such a significant council meeting. Deputy Mayor, could I just take the opportunity to acknowledge our staff team? It's been a huge effort over the last 6-8 months, and John did acknowledge the extra complexity of having things like 3 waters, half in and half out, has made that preparation really, really hard. I think our team, our staff team, Nikki, Louis, have done a great job in supporting our council to produce the discussion document. And I also, Deputy Mayor, want to acknowledge every one of our colleagues around the table, because I think this document has got the fingerprints of every one of the councillors around the table to some degree in some of the specific things for our community. I did have a little chuckle reflecting on reading in preparation of next week's 150th celebrations of the Nelson City Council that 150 years ago they struck the first rate at a penny per property for the year, or 10 cents in today's terms. But I also note that the council went broke in its first year and had 4 mayors, and it was all a very tumultuous period. So when you reflect on that history, there's lots in this which is in really good shape, and we'll be happy to move with those comments, the recommendations in the report for its adoption for consultation, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Wonderful. I was about to say I'll be taking that as you moving them, and I am happy to second, which means we have resolutions 1 to 13 moved and seconded, but just for process, when we come to taking them, we will be taking 1 through 8 first, being sort of the consequential supporting documents and the like, and then 9 through 13 is the actual sort of formal adoption of the plan. But with that being said, and with Nick's comments, we're now open for debate on this item. Is there any debate? Seeing none. Nick, would you like a right of reply?
You'll do it far better in Oldest Cough and Splutter.
Then I'll just echo again, this process often looks to the public to be a lot shorter than it is. In reality, the work on this LTP started more than 12 months ago and will continue for a long time. In fact, it feels weird to differentiate LTPs out because it ultimately ends up being in a continual process of review and reflection as staff take this and do the incredible work that they do out in our community and bring these documents to life. I'd really encourage every member of our community to look through the documents that we're adopting today, to have a say on the future direction of our city. There are a lot of conversations out there at the moment, and this is really the key document that will shape council's actions over the next 3 years, but will also set the foundation of our actions well into the future as well. And again, really want to acknowledge everyone around the table for their hard work and collaborative spirit in bringing this document together, and we welcome public feedback. With that, I will move or put the resolutions 1 through 8. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Those motions are carried. Then I will move resolutions 9 through 13. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That is the adoption of our consultation document done for this year. Again, huge appreciation to staff, and another big thank you to you, John, and your team over at Audit.
Thank you.
With that, we come to the only other item on this agenda, always my favourite topic to chair whilst Nick is out of the room. We have the Mayor's report. And the way I'll run this is I'll pass over to Nick to speak to it. We'll then open for questions and then move into debate. So I'll pass over to you, Mayor Nick.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. And again, my apologies for doing this remotely. The key question in the Mayor's report is where the best place is to make this decision on the issue that's been raised by Nelson and Central Districts Cricket on the Saxton Field Management Plan. And effectively, it's, in my view, a choice between referring the recommendation from the Joint Saxton Committee to a joint meeting of two councils. And I've indicated the fallback position would be for it to go separately to the two councils. It's essentially about having a timely process that would enable us the possibility, there's no guarantee, the possibility of being able to host international cricket games next summer. Council will have been copied in on the letter that was written to both myself and Mayor King on the 20th February, and it's attached to my report. The key thing for cricket is the uncertainty of the exemption process that makes it very difficult for them to manage a international event. The thing that prompted me included in the Mayor's report for today was being advised on Monday that for us to have any chance of being able to host a game next season, we would need to have a decision by the beginning of May. I should have really have included that extra detail in the Mayor's report, but the formal advice I've received from Andy Leonard, the chairman of New Zealand Cricket, is if they don't have a decision on this issue by the beginning of May, they do not feel they'll be in a position to be able to make a bid for any international games next year. There were really sort of four options on progressing this forward. One option would be for us today, the Nelson City Council, if Tasman would agree also, would be to delegate the full decision to the Joint Saxton Field Committee. The reason I didn't think that would be able to meet the timeline, they are scheduled to meet in mid-April. The disadvantage of that approach is that it's chaired by an independent rather than an elected member, and it would not provide the opportunity for all elected members to have a say. The second option, and my preferred approach, is that which is in the recommendation, and that is we allow the Saxton Field Committee to consider the request from cricket, but rather than their recommendation going separately to the two councils, that it would go to the next joint meeting, which fits well with the timetable in that it's just before the first week in May. A third option that we could have is for us to call a urgent council meeting. Both councils would need to do so to be able to meet that timeline. Or the fourth alternative would be to do nothing, albeit that option would effectively even eliminate the opportunity for us to be able to consider a change in the policy to enable us to have a game. Now, I think the broader context to this is, look, we've just had data with both the New Zealand economy being in recession and Nelson being right at the bottom of the pack. I'm of the view that we need to take every opportunity and to work as hard as we can to get events. I think the Black Caps game last year was a great success. We've got 1,100 people going to the game today with the Ferns and another 1,700 on Sunday. I think the alcohol advertising that has been at those games has been quite moderate. It's mainly aimed at TV, and whether the game is at Saxton or some other part of the country. Look, I respect there are different views around the council table, but the decision today is really about whether we want to keep that door open to games and whether we can facilitate a process that will enable us to make a timely and democratic decision. The last point I'd make is that for a joint facility such as Saxton, it is my view that the most democratic body to make that decision is the one that has elected representatives from all of the two councils. The very last point I'd like to cover, Deputy Mayor, is there has been a question about, before making the decision, could we hear from the key sides of the argument in person, Cricket Nelson, and also potentially Whataora, who have expressed views on this. I'm perfectly open to that with either process, whether that would be best done by the Saxton Committee that have a public forum process. But if this resolution is passed, members should take it, that arrangements will be made that before making a decision, both parties would have the opportunity to have their say. Very happy to take questions from colleagues on the report.
Wonderful. We're now open for questions. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Pakipaki.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Just a question, I guess, to me and Nick. Some of us weren't involved. This may actually go to the CE, Nigel. But a lot of us in the room weren't actually privy to the conversations that went on and negotiations afterwards as well. I just read through the letter, and one of the things that actually quite stands out quite clear to me is that there hasn't been much, there weren't much canvassing of the other options that were presented to the cricket body in terms of the opportunity for digital advertising and potentially looking for within their own sponsors range of products. That opportunity that seems to sort of have been bypassed again with the letter. It would be really neat to know whether or not those options that were actually discussed during those meetings and were hotly debated have actually been, if it's your feeling that they've been taken on board by Central Districts and New Zealand Cricket, I guess I'll just say across the board.
I'm happy for Nigel to answer the detail of that, because as you all are aware, I was in the United States and Honduras at the time of those discussions. The only context I would give it is this. It's a really tough gig for Nelson to get cricket games, and that I do think it is unrealistic when they are organising international tours of events from England or other major nations that they are going to have separate arrangements for a venue like Nelson. I think if we go down that track, we will just be, the simple thing for New Zealand Cricket to do will simply be bypass that. And I don't know what those discussions were.
I'm sorry, that wasn't actually the question I asked. I was asking whether or not that they thought that some of these options had been, I'm not asking whether it's you are for or against, but whether or not that we have a feeling that these options were actually really, really well canvassed or taken on board. That's all.
And Nigel's better to answer that question than myself, and I'm happy for him to do so.
Andrew's not in the room, so he's had further conversations, but I certainly had conversations at the last cricket match with the Chief Executive of Cricket New Zealand and also Lance from District. And I can tell you they absolutely took this matter really seriously. And you know, in the conversations we had, they said they were going to do it in good faith. And I can report back that they did do that in good faith. They would normally have, and I'm just looking at my notes to see exactly what we agreed, but they would normally have sort of stands for alcohol. And they said they were not going to do that, some specific things around alcohol that they would normally do at matches. They absolutely did not do. They committed to just having the boundary, the BRB on the boundary. I went to that match. And the only thing for alcohol I saw was that BRB on the boundary. And if you didn't know what BRB was, you wouldn't know it was to do with alcohol. So look, they would normally have done more activations, and they absolutely wanted to make sure that they were represented in good faith. And I believe they did that in a really good way.
So I think to just contextualise that, I just reading through the letter, there was no reference to that whatsoever. It was just basically a repetition of what we heard before, which is good merit points of where they're coming from. But there was really no acknowledgement to say, hey, look, you guys came back with these, the concerns and some potential things, but they just are not going to work for us. That's what I would have expected at this level, and I didn't really see it there.
Any other questions on this item? Councillor Anderson.
Just a question about
Just
the
Mike.
Just with the original policy around the advertising of alcohol, is there any? Can someone explain to me? So I'm assuming it's there because of they're interested in harm reduction. Is that right?
My understanding, Councillor Anderson, is that when in the last term of council, the Saxton Field Committee developed the policy, there was a submission from Whātua Ora that promoted a view of these heavily restrictions on alcohol that was subsequently recommended and adopted by the council. A number of people who were involved in that process have subsequently said to me that they had not appreciated that it would be interpreted in the way to prevent us being able to host the international games. So I think it was put in good faith, but it is also my view, confirmed by some officers and some councillors, is that they did not appreciate that its interpretation would be so narrow as to eliminate our capacity to host international cricket games. But I'm pretty sure that's where it came from. That's to the best of my knowledge, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you.
Councillor Rainey.
Can somebody please confirm that, that in given consideration to an exemption to the policy, if the decision was to be made separately by Tasman District Council and by Nelson City Council, and Tasman District Council voted to grant an exemption, majority of TDC councillors were to do that, and alternatively, or as well, the majority of NCC councillors voted not to grant an exemption, I'm presuming that the exemption would
The
not
answer
be
to that,
passed,
Pete,
correct?
that's ultimately a question for me as the governance, and that is, if you had one council vote yes and one vote no, the no they require approval from both. And so effectively one would be vetoing the other. That is why in my report, I actually believe it's more democratic for it to be a decision of all elected members of both councils.
I think just a minor point of clarification around the decision today, which isn't around where decisions on exemptions will go. It's a decision on any recommendations from the Joint Saxton Field Committee, where that will go. I think it's just important to keep our focus to what's in front of us. Are there any other questions? Councillor Pakipaki.
Kia ora, sorry, so it has occurred to me that in this case, if we go to a joint council, I mean, is it, when you're talking about the most democratic process, what it does is it dilutes the opposition, because we all very well know that the TDC were opposed, were in support of it, and we were borderline. So to put it into a forum where it's quite obvious that the majority are in favour of this, could that, you know, that really undermines the democratic notion that Nelson City Council has its own autonomy?
I think that's open to interpretation, is the honest question, in the sense that...
So the question to the chair, I guess so. Sorry. Oh, actually, no, that's not a question.
I just was going to say, I'm not sure there was much of a question. I think it's a point that we need to interrogate in this discussion. But if you could crystallise it into more of a question.
Yeah, well, the question is, are we allowed to do that? Like it sounds like the mechanisms that allow us to be able to go through that process. And so then really only the question would be, how accountable is that to our constituents?
My view is that Saxton Field is a joint facility, equally funded by both Tasman and Nelson ratepayers, and that all of those people represented by the elected representatives is the right place to make that decision. I don't think it's possible to preempt. It may be the Saxton Field Committee makes no recommendations, in which this becomes academic. It may be that they make recommendations that change the plan, the field management plan. We shouldn't yet speculate as to what their view will be that, albeit you're quite correct, Councillor Paki, when it came to the issue of the exemption, Tasman had a more supportive view of the cricket than did members around the Nelson Council table.
Any further questions on this item? Signal that Councillor Rollo is happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brand, happy to second. That means we are into debate. Councillor Rollo, you have the floor, should you want to take it.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. And 97 for 6 is the score of England, but we're not here to discuss cricket. But I thought I just needed to add that because I was hoping to be at a game today, but I didn't get there. Look, when I got elected to as a councillor, one of the first positions I wanted was to be on the Saxton Field Committee because I had heard from stakeholders, former elected members and people who had seen a committee doing an awesome job. And I must say my first year and a half as a representative on that committee has certainly been eye-opening because the word joint often means working together. And I often see two councils with an invisible line going through a park, not really working together, but in fact us saying this is the Nelson side and them saying this is the Tasman side. And I'm more than supportive of any future discussion that we have around Saxton's Field coming to a joint council meeting because the elephant in the room that I often have worked out at these meetings is we're all going, well, this is what Nelson wants and this is what Tasman wants. And actually there's no real process happening and it's just we try and find the middle ground. And so it's certainly been an eye-opening experience and I'm sure we're going to have more of these. And look, I think whatever comes out of any future discussions around Saxton's Field coming to a joint committee will allow a proper process to be followed of everyone being able to ask questions on the same subject and not two different discussions happening in different rooms. And so that's why I'm happy to support it.
Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. That and echoing Councillor Rollo, joint committees, when I'm talking joint committees, whether it be the Sewage Business Unit or the Saxton committees, I've enjoyed hugely and they work incredibly well. And obviously there's a lot of faith from each of the councils on the councillors that are representing the rest of the council at those meetings. But as you know, they all come back to the full councils to decide. But those work very well because there's a mutual respect between both councils that you can have different views, similar views, and there's a real comfort even with the staff there that there's a real intent to work together. And for my 10 years on council and 6 or 9 of those involved in those committees, they've been incredibly effective. And that's because we sit together in the room together to form a decision. And if there's a slight difference of view, we certainly work those out for the benefit of both. So what I'm referring to here is I think that ideology and that success would go well with this decision, whatever it is. I don't want to preempt what the Saxton Committee come up with and what decision of the view of TDC and NCC, but whatever they decide, that process of debate and sharing, I think will be a real positive. And it gives confidence, especially when you're both stakeholders. And I've found it always a little bit awkward with a lot of decisions that we make here and then concurrently or later or at the same time TDC are making anything shivers. One of us is going to be holding the other but to ransom, and there's a little bit of a chatter between both outside the room trying to work out, hey, how's it going or how we're going here. But if in the same room, you get off your chest, you work out that, hey, you've both got the interests of the community. So I'm very supportive of whatever decision is put or recommendation is put to both councils in the room at the same time so that you can both own that decision without any sort of ill feeling or afterwards. The other aspect of it is, yes, today's decision, please don't make it on preempting what you're going to make or think should be made or what TDC are going to make or a Saxton subcommittee will make on the day. Make this decision based on what you think is best for governance, whatever is put in front of the table. On the other aspect, I want to remind that with our Saxton field facilities, which are joint facilities, there's a real community feel about those, and actually the mission statement of those. This is a bit of a difference, and this is why we've come up to the situation where we're making an exemption or not, is because that facility is aimed at non-competitive, non-internationals. It's about community events, and that's where initially that alcohol advertising ban had been put in, because it keeps with the mantra, for a better word, of being a very much family, community, non-competitive, non-international event facility. Where we have a bit of an anomaly is we've got the cricket ground and the Saxton Oval for competitive events, and a bit commercialised and focusing on both community and economic gain. So this is, I think, is what's tripped us up when originally the decision was made in the past to the advertising or non-advertising avenues, that this has been an anomaly. So this is why this has had to be treated differently, and I think this is why it's come a little bit unstuck or stuck where we are at. So keep that in mind, and both councils, and through the subcommittee, are very much want to protect that community, good family will, but also understand that with this situation, with an international event, that's going that and beyond. So that's why we just need to treat it a little bit differently. And I think that's why, if you can give yourself some courage, is we can still protect very much the community events, but this has got a little bit of a different decision to be made. But hey, yes, I'm very supportive, and I'm glad to see this recommendation coming through to table for the Mayor's Chair's report, Mayor Smith, and that we continue that goodwill and good nature and coming to a good decision, whichever way it is, with both councils taking ownership, not feeling they're doing it either sides of a boundary line, that we're both within the cricket boundary line, and there won't be any no balls.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. Thankfully, your 5 minutes ran out just as you got into cricket puns. Councillor Rainey.
Well, I've got plenty of things to say about the issue of alcohol advertising in cricket games, and indeed whose policy is right and wrong, whether it be Nelson City Council or the Joint Council's policy, or indeed whether it be New Zealand Cricket's policy on continuing to want to attract alcohol corporates to sponsor their games. However, I'm not going to talk about that because that's not the issue that we're debating today. I've also got, I think, a few things to say about the position that joint councils can make, or separate councils can make on issues. And although Saxton is a joint facility, around this table we represent the constituency of Nelson City, and I think we always have to remember that. And I don't think in this instance thinking that we can represent all of the people from the whole Nelson Tasman region is the appropriate thing. But I don't want to discuss that now, because indeed the issue for me today is about process. And the process that's I think at risk here is that there is an attempt here to change the process by which we consider this issue while we're in the middle of the process. The Joint Saxton Field Committee have not come back with a recommendation of the two councils, and yet the process is trying to be shifted and changed during that period of time. And I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think that's the appropriate way to do things. I think that, as is the norm, that it should come back to the two separate councils and then a decision be made. After that decision has been made, if there's an attempt to want to try and change that process, I think that would be the time to do it, but not while the process is being made.
Councillor Stallard.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, I agree that we should look at how we do the voting arrangements around policies on shared facilities, but just not today. I think if we change, to echo Councillor Rainey, if we change the voting rules, i.e. process today, we're in the middle of deciding on policy, we end up with some poor, perhaps even unforeseen outcomes where the process influences the policy itself. And I certainly choose my words carefully, and I did send an email through to me and Nick, and we had a good chat on the phone, which I appreciate. But we do need to look carefully at the implications of what's proposed today. And there's a possibility it could end up in what I decided I would call an inadvertent gerrymander. So basically, if we change the rules around voting, and otherwise people were still voting the same way as they were before, you can get a different outcome. And there's a risk of that happening today, and we must be aware of that and consider if we're happy to accept that risk. When we receive reports to vote on, I would like to think that we do see clearly spelled out the pros and cons. And to me, the risk I've outlined is a strong, con here, and as a potentially poor outcome. And I would have preferred it was explored in the report itself. My preference is that first, as Pete Rainey says, we decide on policy under the same rules, voting rules we've been operating on up to now. We get the policy sorted, and then we look at the process, i.e. whether it's the joint committee or two individual committees who vote on policy and so on at Saxon Field. Because if we pass this motion today, the risk is that it'll be the passing of this motion that decides as the main factor in controlling the eventual policy rather than the later vote on the policy itself. And I don't think that's the intention. So I'll be voting against this proposal. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I totally agree with Councillor Stallard. I'm uncomfortable with changing the rules to the game. I believe there'd be a perception of meddling, and when I do make decisions, I do like to have both sides. So I do see Nelson Cricket, and there's been talk of the pros as far as economics. I've got a little bit of information from Alcohol Health Watch. I'm just going to read it out, seeing as Nelson Sport managed to get some stuff in the report. So these are all referenced. I won't read out the whole lot. Sport as a mechanism for advertising increases the potency and harm of the advertising by capitalising on the excitement of the game to increase positive attitudes towards alcohol brand and alcohol. In general, it further normalises alcohol as an ordinary commodity. Second one, indirect exposure to alcohol sports sponsorship associated with increased levels of drinking amongst children. Next one, for adults, association between direct alcohol sponsorship and hazardous drinking. Another one, sports people are good targets for the industry. Research shows they're likely to drink more anyway than the average population. This is true in New Zealand as well, especially in elite provincial sports people, followed by club/social sports people. Last one, alcohol sponsorship, particularly harmful for males. Messaging often works to perpetuate certain ideals of masculinity associated with heavier drinking, stoicism, and promote set ideas around vulnerability can present a barrier to males seeking help. They did send me much more. I would be in support of option 3, 2 meetings brought forward, but like Councillor Stallard, I worry that if we would go to joint council, basically the decision on whether there's an exemption would be made today.
Councillor Hodgson, and then Mena.
Thanks, through the chair. I want to support this in the principle that where we have these joint committees or shared facilities in the spirit of partnership, I feel that the joint committee of both councils is the place to make those decisions. But that's a broader policy change in my eyes, or a broader change to our approach. And that shift in this single instance, my understanding is that would be inconsistent with how we do things across the board. And so while this is the direction I'd want to head, I'd want to unpack that issue a whole lot further and weigh up the pros and cons. So I won't support this today.
Mena.
The issue for council is a practical path to make a decision in a timely way. We have a meeting of the Saxon Field Committee scheduled on the 16th of May. if this council wishes to give any practical opportunity for us to be able to host international games next summer, then we need to make a decision by the beginning of May. And the 3rd of May joint meeting of the two councils is the obvious. And that is what has motivated bringing this to council. Now, I'm a bit concerned that people don't appreciate how difficult it is for a region like Nelson to be able to attract international events. And I believe we're almost tripping up ourselves to just make it really hard and bureaucratic. And I have to say, this council, considering not granting an exemption a week before tickets were out to go to sale last year, was deeply damaging to the confidence that organisations can have in hosting events. And so I do want council to try and be can-do, try and make things happen in our city. Now, in respect of those that argue at going to a joint committee, it's just about being practical. I indicated in my mayor's report that perfectly open to have both Whataora and Nelson Cricket coming before the decision makers, the joint committee. What effectively those who argue it should go to 2 council meetings, again, are just being impractical and bureaucratic, saying that both Whataora and Nelson Cricket would need to separately present to 2 councils, that were not mature enough to actually be able to say, well, actually, Tasman people and their representatives have an equal right to have a say in what occurs at those Saxton facilities. And some here are sort of a view in Nelson that, well, if we want to veto it, even though we may be a minority in the overall region, well, we want to do just that. So I really think this is a bit of a test for us. And that is, are we going to try hard to attract international events, to get Nelson out of the economic hole that we are in, while still doing so on the basis of good process of people being able to have a say? Or are we actually going to put barriers in the way and effectively compound the situation that developed last November, where we're seen as a region that is going to make it difficult for our sports clubs to host the sort of events that we have at Saxton Field this weekend? I had enormous pride in the Saxton Field facility, the standard of the play, the thousands of people that enjoyed that game, and a vote against my recommendation is effectively a vote saying we don't want more events like that in our city.
Point of order. Surely that's misrepresenting views. Surely that's misrepresenting the views that have been clearly stated, that and we're not opposed to cricket, but we are opposed to changing the process midway through deciding on policy. That was clearly articulated.
Well, Nick, can I just take a point of order?
No, I'll just hold there whilst I consider. I think in terms of the standing orders around misrepresentation, whilst it is a representation that the member disagrees with, there is a scope within firm debate that whilst I would not encourage members to make that statement, to rule it as firmly out of order, I think would set poor precedent in terms of being able to robustly challenge where members see the policy impacts of other alternative policy proposals. So I'm just going to leave it there because I don't want to open that can of worms. We're meant to be done 24 minutes ago. I will have my contribution, which is just to say I really want to acknowledge members' considered views and contributions on this discussion so far. One of the points of reflection I had was around that really what's in front of us is about where should decisions be made. And I share Councillor Hodgson's view that actually, much like we do with the Joint Regional Transport Committee, in establishing that, one of the things we're very clear on is that we also wanted it to align with the Joint Committee, because it makes sense if you're going to partner consistently. In this case, what's being discussed is changing quite specifically those delegations. I would be much more comfortable with this resolution actually if it considered a wider shifting of delegations around the consideration of the Saxton Reserve Management Plan to the Joint Committee. Because I think the contributions from councillors around the wider perception is very real here, particularly because the recommendation is so specific to be solely about alcohol advertising as opposed to the wider reserve management plan. And I think that is something to pause and reflect on. Is that actually, if we think that the reserve management plan should be considered by the Joint Committee, then that's the decision we should make, instead of picking out a specific part of it that we think should be considered by the Joint Committee and leaving the rest. Because any other issue arises with the reserve management plan, we won't be changing our delegations. Those will still be going to separate parts of the committee, or to our separate councils to decide. And so I think from a governance perspective and from a delegations register perspective, we're fundamentally introducing an anomaly. And it's one that I think on the whole is where the discussion should be had. I just think that this resolution, if it is to pass, should actually be wider than that and should talk about moving the whole consideration of the reserve management plan to the Joint Committee, recognising that it is a joint asset shared between us and Tasman. And that means that when it comes time to discuss these issues, we can discuss them in the full scope of the plan itself, not in terms of an arbitrarily defined boundary for the sake of efficiency, knowing full well that we can still progress this matter, even if this resolution fails through the calling of separate council meetings. And that is a perfectly legitimate option that can be pursued after this. I don't know if mover or seconder wants to consider that possibility of actually widening the scope, but that is my contribution. Are there any other speakers on this item? Being none, I will offer the right of reply to Councillor Roller.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor, and I won't talk for too long. And it's we have some odd processes around the council table, that is for sure. And it's an interesting debate because we talk about reserve management plans, and I could bring up yet again that it's now a year since one was going to happen and it still hasn't, but I'll leave that for another day. But look, we've got a decision here on actually should it come to a joint meeting or not, which to me makes perfect sense. And I think that the statement that I would add is actually the Saxton Field Committee's yet to make a decision on if we actually want to change the reserve management plan. We're just making a decision here on if it should go to a joint council or two, and I'm one for getting rid of red tape and process. And so that's why I'm more than happy to allow this to go to a joint council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Rollo. I will now put the resolutions. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? On the voices, that is carried.
Sorry, could we have a show of hands? I didn't seem that clear to me.
I'll have a show of hands as my compromise for not having a division. All those in favour? Opposed? On the voices, I'll call that carried. That now brings us to the end of our council meeting, almost on time, only 30 minutes out, which honestly I'm quite happy with. So with that, I will thank members and close us off with karakia. Ka whakairea te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia turu ki whakataha ai, kia turu ki whakataha ai. Haumie, huie, ai kie. I will take a 5-minute stretch and then back for workshop